Chapter 2, Part 1. It was about 3 miles to the store, and I nearly ran Rowdy's legs off getting there. I was pretty sure that when I told my grandpa about the monkey, he'd know what to do about it. My grandpa was one of those old, slow moving, boy loving kind of grandpas. We had been pals for as long as I could remember. He'd do anything he could for me, and I'd do anything I could for him. If you were looking at the outside of my grandpa, you wouldn't see very much. He was just about as big around the middle as he was tall. He didn't have much hair either, just a little around the edges, and it was as gray and stiff as a wild hog's whiskers. He wore glasses, chewed star tobacco, and needed a shave about 360 days a year. It was the inside of my grandpa that really counted. He had a heart as big as a number 4 wash tub, and inside that wrinkled old hide of his was enough boy understanding for all the boys in the world. On entering the store, I saw Grandpa over behind the counter, setting canned goods on a shelf. He didn't hear me when I came in. Of course, I was barefooted and didn't make any more noise than a lizard walking on a rail fence. I eased right up behind him and said in a voice much too loud, "Grandpa, Rowdy treat a monkey." I saw my old grandpa flinch, just about like I always did when a wasp dabbed his fiery little dagger in me. He took his time about turning around. Ducking his head, he looked at me over his glasses, then he looked at Rowdy. Rowdy was just sitting there on his rear, looking at Grandpa. His long ears were sticking straight up, and his tongue was hanging out about a foot. Grandpa must have liked what he saw. He grinned a little and said, "Now let's do this all over again. Only this time, don't talk so loud." "You mean you want me to go back outside, Grandpa, and come in again just like I did?" I asked. "No, no," Grandpa said, waving his hand. "You don't have to go back outside. Just say that all over again." "Oh," I said. I swallowed a couple times and tried hard to control my voice. "Rowdy treat a monkey." Grandpa nodded his head and said, "Uh huh. That's what I thought you said. I wanted to be sure, though." "Are you sure it was a monkey?" "Sure as I need a haircut, Grandpa." I said, "It was a monkey, all right. Had a skinny tail, 4 long legs, a baby looking face, and hair all over it. Papa thinks it was a pet monkey that belonged to a fisherman and it got away from him." Grandpa thought a second, then shaking his head, he said, "No, I don't think it belonged to a fisherman. Is one monkey all Rowdy treat?" "That's all I saw, Grandpa," I said, "but I believe there was something else around there. I heard a lot of noises." Grandpa's bushy eyebrows jumped straight up. "Noises?" he asked. "What kind of noises?" "I don't know what kind of noises they were, Grandpa," I said. "I've heard all kinds of noises in the bottoms, and I usually know what's making them. But I've never heard anything like that before. It sounded like cries and squeals, barks and grunts, and everything else. It scared me into a running fit." Grandpa got all excited. He took off his glasses, and I saw a twinkle in his friendly old eyes. Then, very seriously, he said, "I'm pretty sure those noises you heard were more monkeys. Sure sounds like it. From what I understand, there were about 30 of them." My eyes got as big as bur oak acorns. "30?" I exclaimed. "Boy, that's a lot of monkeys, Grandpa. Are you sure?" "Can't be positive," Grandpa said, "but I'd be willing to bet my last bucket of sorghum molasses on it." "Grandpa, do you know something about those monkeys?" I asked. Rearing back and looking as important as Rowdy did when he had treed something, Grandpa said, "Sure, I know something about those monkeys. That's what grandpas are for, isn't it? To know things for boys?" I grinned and said, "Yes, sir, I guess so." It didn't surprise me too much to find out that my grandpa knew something about the monkeys. I was firmly convinced that he was the smartest man in those Ozark Hills, anyhow. He knew a little bit about everything. He knew where all the best fishing holes were and the right kind of bait to use. He knew the best places to hunt and the right time to go hunting. It didn't seem, though, that all the good things my grandpa knew were things that I liked. Pointing to the counter, Grandpa said, "Sit down and I'll tell you about it. Believe me, this monkey business is a good thing. It's a real good thing for you." "Good for me," I said as I climbed up on the counter. "What's good about it, Grandpa?" Shoving his hands in his pockets and looking down at the floor, Grandpa said, "Well, let's see now. To begin with, you've been wanting a pony and a 22, haven't you?" "I sure have," I said. "I've been wanting a pony and a 22 ever since the day I was born. Every boy in the hills has a pony and a gun but me. But things like that cost so much money, it doesn't look like I'll ever have them." "Oh, I wouldn't say that," Grandpa said. "If things go right, you could be riding and shooting before you know it." "Oh, Grandpa," I said, feeling sorry for myself. "How am I ever going to get enough money to buy a pony and a 22?" "By catching those monkeys," Grandpa said. "That's how you're going to get it. They're worth a lot of money." "You mean their skins, Grandpa?" I said. "Are monkey skins worth anything?" No, no, Grandpa said. Don't even think about skinning them. No, sir, that's the last thing in the world you want to do. They'll have to be taken alive and not harmed in any way. Taken alive? I said. Why, Grandpa, how in the world am I going to do that? I don't know anything about catching monkeys. I've caught coons and possums and skunks and everything else, but not monkeys. Sticking out his chin, Grandpa said, Well, I'm no expert monkey catcher either, but we're going to catch them just the same. There's a big reward being offered for those monkeys. When I heard Grandpa mention the reward, I flew completely out of gear. Reward? I said, jumping down from the counter. How much is it? Now, wait a minute, Grandpa said, holding up his hand, and don't rush me. He paused before going on. About a week ago, two men stopped here at the store. He said, Those fellows belonged to a circus train that was wrecked over on the railroad. From what they told me, it must have been a pretty bad wreck. One of the cars jumped the track and busted wide open. There were some valuable monkeys in that car, and a lot of them got away. Grandpa caught his breath and said, A few of the little fellows were killed in the wreck, but not many. The ones that lived were scared to death, and they took off through the hills. Now, that circus was just coming out of winter quarters and had a pretty tight schedule laid out for the season. They didn't have much time between stops, but the crew did manage to lay over for a few days. They caught all but about 30 of the monkeys, and I'm pretty sure those were the ones you and Rowdy ran into. Grandpa, I said, those monkeys are the ones that got away from the circus train. How do you suppose they got way over here? It's 8 miles from our place over to the railroad. I've been thinking about that, Grandpa said. You know, this time of year, it's hot and dry in the hills. I expect that the monkeys were having a tough time finding food and water. Now, all animals have an instinct that tells them where they can find food and water. Those monkeys probably just kept going until they wound up over here in these Cherokee bottoms. There's food of all kinds for them over here: wild grapes, berries, nuts, acorns, roots, and all kinds of green stuff. I'll bet you're right, Grandpa, I said. Rubbing his hands together and looking as pleased as a fox in a hen house, Grandpa said, Just wait until you hear about the reward. All those monkeys but one are worth $2 apiece. How does that sound to you? Keep in mind, this is the 1800s. $2 apiece? I cried. Boy, Grandpa, that's a bunch of money. How come they're offering such a big reward for a bunch of little old monkeys? They're not just little old monkeys, Grandpa said. They've been trained for acts in the circus. That's why they're so valuable. It takes a long time to train a monkey, but you haven't heard the half of it yet. You're overlooking something very important. Overlooking something? I said. What am I overlooking, Grandpa? As if he were put out with me, Grandpa snorted and said, Well, use your head and think a little. Remember everything I told you about those monkeys and do a little figuring. Grandpa knew that I wasn't too good with figures, and he was all the time making up some kind of an old arithmetic problem for me to work on. It always made me feel bad when he did this because I never intended to be anything but a hunter or an explorer, and I couldn't see where arithmetic had anything to do with that. Grandpa, I said, with all this talk about monkeys and money, I can't even see good, much less do any thinking. What is it that I'm overlooking? Grandpa snorted like Sally Gooden did when she had seen a booger. That last monkey, he said. I told you they were offering a $2 reward for all the monkeys but one. Oh, I said, looking sheepish. I forgot all about that monkey. Why is it so important? Important? Grandpa said. That's the most important monkey of the whole works. He's worth his weight in gold. They're offering $100 reward for him. When I heard Grandpa mention that $100 reward, I lost my breath completely. My throat got as dry as the ashes under Mama's old wash pot, and I had a heck of a time swallowing. I finally got a hold of myself and said in a loud whisper, $100 for one monkey. Supper and cornmeal, Johnny. Grandpa, that must be some monkey. Grandpa chuckled and said, From what those fellas said, that monkey is so smart he's almost human. He's different than the other monkeys. Let's see now, what kind of monkey did that fella say he was? Oh, yes, he's a chimpanzee or something like that. Anyhow, they're offering $100 reward for him. I couldn't get over it. $100! I exclaimed. $100 for one monkey! Why, if I could catch all of them, I'd have more money than the United States Bank has. Just about, Grandpa said, chuckling. And I think we better keep this monkey business to ourselves. If word gets out, every farmer in these hills will quit farming and start hunting monkeys. We can't have that at all. We sure can't, I agreed. I won't say a word to anybody. This is the first time in my life that I've had a chance to earn any money. But what's bothering me is catching those monkeys. How am I going to do that? Right now, I don't know, Grandpa said, but we're going to catch them just the same. There never was an animal that couldn't be caught. All we have to do is figure out a way. Grandpa put his thinking cap on and started mumbling and grumbling. I couldn't understand one word he was saying. It always tickled me when Grandpa had got something heavy like that on his mind. He did all sorts of things. Sometimes he'd start walking up and back, then again he might start shuffling around in a little circle. He had a habit of pulling at the lobe of his right ear, rubbing his nose, or digging at the wiry whiskers on his chin. I had learned a long time ago that when my grandpa had his thinking cap on, the best thing for me to do was to be patient, and above all, not to say anything. So I just stood there with monkeys, dollars, ponies, and 22s running around in my head and waited while Grandpa cut all kinds of dittos. I can almost feel the idea when it hit Grandpa. Looking very pleased with himself, he smiled and said, I think I've got it figured out. You know, you can always figure out things if you use your head a little bit. I didn't like the way Grandpa looked at me when he said use your head a little bit, but I didn't say anything. Walking over to the hardware part of the store, Grandpa picked up 6 small steel traps and a piece of baling wire. Coming back, he looked at me and said, I've got some old meal sacks in the storeroom. Go back there and get one of them. I flew to the storeroom and got the sack, wondering what in the world Grandpa was going to do. Spreading the sack out on the counter, Grandpa took a pair of scissors and started cutting long strips about 2 inches wide from the soft material. Taking one of the traps, he mashed the spring down with his hands. Now take that wire and wrap it around the spring, good and tight, so it'll hold the spring down, he said. Taking the wire in both hands, I started wrapping the spring as Grandpa had told me. I was so excited and nervous I couldn't do anything right. Once I almost wrapped one of Grandpa's fingers to the spring. Now this is the part where I'm going to stop and give you some information to answer a question on your uh, question sheet if you're watching these videos. We're going to say that Grandpa named his finger that was almost wrapped up. So Grandpa's name for his finger is, let's see, Philly Fingerson. Philly Fingerson. Philly Fingerson. Philly Fingerson. So Grandpa's finger is named Philly Fingerson. Back to the book. Take it easy, Grandpa barked. I don't want my fingers cut off with that wire. We got plenty of time. Those monkeys won't run away. I'm sorry, Grandpa, I said, rubbing his work callous finger with my hand. Thinking about all those monkeys and all that money has got me so worked up I can't do anything right. Why, if I catch all of them, I'd have more money than that Rockefeller man. Grandpa laughed and said, I don't know about that. I understand he has an awful lot of money. Once the spring was securely wired, the jaws of the trap were free and useless. Taking one of the cloth strips, Grandpa started wrapping the jaws. I saw right away what his idea was. With all that soft padding on the jaws of the trap, it probably wouldn't hurt a monkey's paw at all. Just to let Grandpa know that I was using my head a little bit, I said, Boy, Grandpa, that sure is a good idea. Why, with the jaws of the trap wrapped like that, a monkey wouldn't even know it was on his foot. We're going to pause for part 1.